Hi, I'm Madison. I'm a senior psychology major at State University, and I've always believed that kindness costs nothing but means everything. But that Tuesday afternoon in October, one simple act of helping a stranger would completely shatter my family's perception of me and change my life forever. Have you ever been criticized by your own family for helping someone in need? Well, buckle up, because what happened next will make you question everything you think you know about judging people by their appearance. It was around 4:30 p.m. when I was walking home from my part-time job at the campus counseling center. The autumn air was crisp, and I was actually looking forward to getting home, maybe grabbing a cup of coffee, and diving into my research paper on family dynamics. Ironic, considering what was about to unfold. As I turned the corner onto Maple Street, just 2 blocks from my house, I noticed an elderly woman standing at the intersection. She looked completely lost, turning her head left and right with this confused, almost panicked expression. She was probably in her late 70s, wearing a navy blue coat that had seen better days, carrying an old leather handbag that was worn around the edges. But there was something about her posture, the way she held herself, that suggested she wasn't used to being lost or vulnerable. What caught my attention immediately was this small, intricate brooch pinned to her coat lapel. Even from a distance, it sparkled in the afternoon sunlight. It looked expensive, really expensive, which seemed oddly out of place with her somewhat disheveled appearance. I slowed my pace, watching her for a moment. She kept checking a piece of paper in her hand, then looking up at the street signs, then back down at the paper. The frustration and confusion on her face was heartbreaking. That's when I heard my mother's voice cutting through the air like a knife. "Madison! Madison! Get away from there right now!" I looked up to see my mom standing in our front yard, her hands on her hips. That familiar look of exasperation and judgment plastered across her face. She was still in her work clothes, a real estate blazer and pencil skirt, looking every inch the successful suburban professional she prided herself on being. "Come inside this instant! Don't waste your time on street trash!" The words hit me like a physical blow. Street trash. My mother had just called this confused elderly woman street trash, and she'd said it loud enough for half the neighborhood to hear. I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment, not for myself, but for the cruelty of it. I glanced back at the elderly woman, and I could see she'd heard my mother's words. Her shoulders sagged slightly, and she looked down at her worn shoes with an expression that broke my heart. But here's the thing that still haunts me about that moment. She didn't look surprised. It was as if she was used to people treating her this way. "Madison Elizabeth Thompson, I said now!" My mother's voice had that edge to it that meant she was about to launch into one of her lectures about appropriate behavior and family reputation. But I couldn't just walk away. Everything I'd learned in my psychology courses about human dignity, everything I believed about basic human decency, everything my grandmother had taught me about treating people with kindness, it all came flooding back. I walked over to the elderly woman instead. "Excuse me, ma'am," I said gently. "You look like you might be lost. Can I help you find where you're going?" Her head snapped up, and I was struck by her eyes. They were this incredible pale blue, sharp and intelligent, despite the confusion I'd seen moments before. When she looked at me, it was like she was seeing right through to my soul. "Oh, my dear," she said, and her voice was cultured, refined, with just a hint of an accent I couldn't quite place. "I seem to have gotten myself turned around. I was supposed to meet my son's driver, but I can't seem to remember where." She held up the piece of paper, and I could see it had an address written in shaky handwriting, but it was for a medical building across town. "What's going on here?" I turned to see my older brother Jake jogging over from the house, probably sent by Mom to drag me away from what she clearly saw as an embarrassing situation. Jake was 26, worked in finance, and had inherited every ounce of my mother's social climbing instincts and none of her occasional moments of human warmth. "Madison's playing saint again," he said, loud enough for the elderly woman to hear. "Mom wants you inside. Now." "I'm helping someone who's lost," I said firmly. "It'll just take a minute." Jake rolled his eyes dramatically. "Madison, look at her. She's obviously homeless or something. Mom's right, you need to stop picking up strays." What if she has diseases? What if she's dangerous? The elderly woman's face flushed, but she lifted her chin with a dignity that made Jake's words seem even more cruel and ignorant. I appreciate your concern, young man, she said to Jake with icy politeness, but I can assure you I'm neither homeless nor dangerous. I'm simply an old woman who's gotten a bit confused about directions. Something in her tone, the way she carried herself despite the circumstances, made me pay closer attention. This wasn't just any confused elderly person. There was an authority in her voice, a confidence that spoke of someone who was used to being listened to and respected. Ma'am, let me help you, I said, ignoring Jake's exaggerated size. Do you remember the name of the medical building? Or maybe your son's name? I can call him for you. She looked at me with such gratitude that it made my chest tight. You're very kind, dear. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I was at Dr. Patterson's office for my appointment, and I was supposed to meet my driver out front, but... She paused, looking confused again. I'm not quite sure how I ended up here. Jake snorted. Eleanor Whitmore? Come on, Madison, she's clearly making up names, probably hoping you'll give her money or take her home or something. But I was focused on Eleanor's face, and I could see something that looked like embarrassment and frustration. Whatever was happening with her memory, whatever had caused her to get lost, it was clearly distressing for someone who was used to being in control. Madison! My mother's voice had reached that pitch that meant I was about to be in serious trouble. Get away from that vagrant this instant! You're embarrassing our family! That word, vagrant, hung in the air like a poison cloud. I saw Eleanor's face change, saw the hurt flash across her features before she carefully composed herself. But I also saw something else. Instead of cowering or getting defensive, she straightened her shoulders and looked at my mother with the kind of cool assessment usually reserved for someone evaluating a particularly unimpressive business proposal. Mrs. Thompson, I presume? Eleanor said, her voice carrying across the distance with surprising strength. Your daughter is showing remarkable compassion. You should be proud. My mother's mouth fell open. She clearly hadn't expected this vagrant to speak with such articulate confidence, much less to know our last name or to essentially lecture her on parenting. How do you know our name? Jake demanded, suddenly looking less confident. Eleanor smiled, and for just a moment I caught a glimpse of something that made me think there was much more to this woman than met the eye. Your mailbox, dear boy. It's quite clearly visible from here. She was right, of course. Our mailbox did have Thompson Family painted on it in my mother's preferred script font, but somehow Eleanor's observation felt like more than just good eyesight. It felt like the kind of careful attention to detail that spoke of intelligence and experience. Eleanor, I said gently, let me drive you home. Or we can call your son. You shouldn't be walking around confused and lost. Absolutely not! My mother had apparently recovered from her surprise and was now marching over to us. Madison, you are not getting in a car with a stranger, and you are certainly not bringing strangers to our home. I don't care if she knows our name or speaks properly. Anyone can put on an act. Mom, she's clearly not dangerous. She's clearly troubled, my mother interrupted. And you're clearly not thinking straight. This is exactly the kind of naive behavior that's going to get you into serious trouble someday. Eleanor watched this exchange with growing interest, her sharp blue eyes moving from my mother to me and back again. I had the distinct impression she was cataloging every word, every gesture, filing it all away for future reference. I don't want to cause family discord, Eleanor said diplomatically. Perhaps I should just call a taxi. She started digging through her handbag, and I noticed her hands were shaking slightly. Whether from age, confusion, or distress, I couldn't tell, but it made my decision for me. No, I said firmly. Mom, I'm 22 years old. I can make my own decisions about helping someone who needs assistance. Eleanor, let me at least help you figure out how to get home safely. The look of gratitude Eleanor gave me was worth every ounce of my mother's disapproval. But what happened next would haunt me for the rest of the week. Fine, my mother said in that voice that meant the conversation was over, but the consequences were just beginning. But don't come crying to me when this backfires spectacularly. And Madison, you're grounded. No car privileges for a week. Maybe that'll teach you to think before you act. Jake smirked. St. Madison strikes again. Some people never learn. As my family stalked back toward the house, leaving me standing on the sidewalk with Eleanor, I felt a mixture of anger and embarrassment wash over me. But Eleanor reached out and gently touched my arm. You have a good heart, my dear, she said softly. Don't let anyone convince you that's a weakness. There was something in her voice, a weight of experience and wisdom that made me look at her more carefully. The worn coat, the confused wandering, the obvious memory issues, they were all real. But underneath it all, there was something else. A strength, a presence that didn't match the image of a helpless elderly woman my family had painted. Come on, I said, making up my mind. Let me help you get home. What's your address? Eleanor smiled, and for just a moment it was like watching the sun break through clouds. You know what, dear? I think I'd like that very much. As we started walking toward my car, parked just down the street, I had no idea that this simple act of kindness was about to unravel everything my family thought they knew about the world, about success, and about the true meaning of character. Behind us, I could see my mother watching from the living room window, her face a mask of disapproval and barely contained fury. Jake had probably already started texting his friends about his bleeding heart sister and her latest charitable disaster. They had no idea that the woman they'd dismissed as street trash was about to change our lives forever. And honestly, neither did I. But as Eleanor settled into my passenger seat, carefully adjusting that mysterious brooch on her lapel, she looked at me with eyes that held secrets I couldn't even begin to imagine. You know, Madison, she said as I started the car, I have a feeling this is the beginning of something rather extraordinary. She had no idea how right she was. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my mother's voice echoing through the house like a siren announcing my downfall. I cannot believe you went behind our backs, she shouted from downstairs. Do you have any idea how irresponsible that was? I groaned and checked my phone. 7:23 a.m. Apparently, my mother had discovered that I'd taken Eleanor home last night, despite being explicitly told not to. I'd tried to be quiet when I came back, but clearly not quiet enough. The drive to Eleanor's house had been enlightening. She'd directed me to Riverside Heights, which was easily the most expensive neighborhood in our entire city. I'm talking about the kind of place where the driveways are longer than most people's streets, where every house looks like it should be featured in Architectural Digest. When we'd pulled up to her address, I'd literally had to pick my jaw up off the floor. The house wasn't just big, it was a full-scale mansion, complete with wrought iron gates, manicured gardens that probably cost more to maintain than my family's annual income, and security cameras positioned at strategic points around the property. This is your house? I'd asked, trying not to sound as shocked as I felt. Eleanor had smiled that mysterious smile again. Home sweet home, dear. Thank you so much for the ride. You've been incredibly kind. She'd started to get out of the car, but then turned back to me. Madison, I hope you won't let your family's reaction discourage you from helping others. The world needs more people like you. Then she'd walked up to those imposing front doors like she owned the place, which, apparently, she did. Now, as I trudged downstairs to face the music, I couldn't stop thinking about the contrast between the confused, lost woman I'd met on the street and the confident person who'd walked up to that mansion's front door like a queen returning to her castle. There she is, Jake said from the kitchen table, not bothering to look up from his phone. St. Madison, back from her charity mission. My mother was standing by the coffee maker, her posture radiating disapproval. She was already dressed for work, but I could tell she'd been up for a while, probably rehearsing this confrontation. Sit down, she said in that tone that meant I was about to get the lecture of a lifetime. I slumped into a chair across from Jake, who was now openly smirking at me. Madison, what you did last night was not just disobedient, it was dangerous and embarrassing, my mother began. Taking a strange woman to her home? What if she'd been lying? What if she'd been setting you up for some kind of scam? What if she'd pulled a weapon on you? Mom, she's like 75 years old and clearly has some memory issues. She wasn't exactly a threat. That's exactly the kind of naive thinking that's going to get you hurt someday, Jake chimed in. You can't just trust every sob story you hear on the street. My father, who'd been silently reading his newspaper, finally looked up. Madison, your mother's right. In this neighborhood, we look out for family first. We don't get involved with strangers, especially ones who are clearly troubled. The word troubled hung in the air like an insult. I thought about Eleanor's precise diction, her confident bearing, that expensive-looking brooch, and the mansion she'd walked into like she'd lived there her entire life. Maybe she wasn't as troubled as you think, I said quietly. Oh, really? My mother's voice dripped with sarcasm. So you think that confused old woman wandering around lost is actually some kind of secret millionaire? Jake burst out laughing. Right, Madison. I'm sure she's hiding a fortune under that raggedy coat. As punishment for your disobedience, my mother continued, you're grounded for the week. No car, no going out with friends, and you're coming straight home after classes and work. Maybe that'll teach you to think before you act on these bleeding heart impulses. I wanted to argue, to defend myself, to point out that helping a lost elderly person was basic human decency, not some radical act of rebellion. But I could see from the set of my mother's jaw that the conversation was over. After my family left for work, I sat in the empty kitchen, stewing in frustration and something else I couldn't quite name. Curiosity, maybe. There was something about Eleanor that didn't add up, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. Finally, I grabbed my laptop and did what any self-respecting college student would do when faced with a mystery. I Googled her. Eleanor Whitmore, I typed into the search bar. The results that popped up made my coffee cup slip from my hands, coffee splashing across the kitchen table. The first result was a Forbes article from 3 years ago. Eleanor Whitmore steps down as CEO of Whitmore Industries after 40-year legacy. The second was a Fortune magazine feature, The Whitmore Empire, How One Woman Built a $2.3 billion fortune. The third was a recent news article from just 6 months ago. Philanthropist Eleanor Whitmore diagnosed with early-stage dementia, son takes over company operations. I clicked on the Forbes article with shaking hands. There, staring back at me from my laptop screen, was a professional headshot of Eleanor. Same sharp blue eyes, same determined jawline, same intelligent expression. But this Eleanor was wearing a tailored business suit and the kind of confidence that comes with running a Fortune 500 company. According to the article, Eleanor Whitmore had built Whitmore Industries from a small construction company she'd inherited from her father into one of the largest commercial development firms in the country. She owned real estate in 12 states, had been a major philanthropist for decades, and was considered one of the most influential businesswomen of her generation. The article about her dementia diagnosis was harder to read. It talked about how she'd started showing signs of memory confusion and disorientation, particularly when she was in unfamiliar places or under stress. Her son, Richard Whitmore Jr., had taken over day-to-day operations of the company, while Eleanor maintained an advisory role. I sat back in my chair, my mind reeling. The confused elderly woman my family had dismissed as street trash was worth over $2 billion. She was a titan of industry, a philanthropist, and according to every article I read, known for her generosity and sharp business acumen. And my family had treated her like garbage. I kept reading, diving deeper into Eleanor's story. She'd grown up poor, worked her way through college, and built her empire through sheer determination and intelligence. She donated millions to educational causes, funded scholarships for underprivileged students, and was particularly known for supporting programs that helped at-risk youth. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here was a woman who dedicated her life to helping people like me, first-generation college students trying to make something of themselves, and my family had treated her with nothing but contempt. I was so absorbed in my research that I almost missed the knock at our front door. When I looked up, I could see a figure through the frosted glass, but I couldn't make out who it was. I opened the door to find a middle-aged Latina woman in scrubs, the kind that nurses or caregivers wear. She had kind eyes and a warm smile. "Excuse me, are you Madison?" she asked. "Yes, that's me. Can I help you?" My name is Maria Santos. I'm Mrs. Whitmore's caregiver. She asked me to find you and give you this. She handed me a small, elegant envelope with my name written on it in shaky but still refined handwriting. Mrs. Whitmore wanted me to tell you how much your kindness meant to her yesterday, Maria continued. She hasn't stopped talking about the angel who helped her when she was lost. I opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a handwritten note on expensive stationery. Dear Madison, thank you for your kindness yesterday. In a moment when I felt lost and confused, you treated me with dignity and compassion. Your family may not appreciate your generous heart, but please know that it is a rare and precious gift. I would be honored to have coffee with you sometime, if you're willing. I think we might have more in common than you realize. With gratitude, Eleanor. At the bottom was a phone number and an address. Not the mansion address, but what looked like an office building downtown. She means it, you know, Maria said, watching me read the note. Mrs. Whitmore is very particular about the people she invites into her life. The fact that she wants to see you again, that's special. After Maria left, I sat on our front porch, rereading Eleanor's note and thinking about everything I'd learned. This woman, this incredibly successful and generous woman, wanted to have coffee with me. Me, the naive college student who my own family thought was too trusting for her own good. I thought about my mother's words. Maybe that'll teach you to think before you act on these bleeding heart impulses. But as I sat there, holding a personal note from a billionaire philanthropist who wanted to thank me for treating her like a human being, I realized something important. My bleeding heart impulses weren't something to be ashamed of. They were something to be proud of. That evening, when my family came home, I was ready for them. So, Jake said, dropping his work bag by the door, learned your lesson about picking up strays yet? Actually, I said, closing my laptop, I learned something very interesting today. My mother looked up from sorting through the mail. Oh, and what's that? I learned that the woman I helped yesterday, Eleanor Whitmore, is worth about $2.3 billion. The silence in the room was deafening. My father's newspaper crinkled as his hands tightened around it. Jake's mouth fell open. My mother just stared at me. That's impossible, Jake said finally. You're making that up. I turned my laptop around and showed them the Forbes article, complete with Eleanor's professional photo. Eleanor Whitmore, CEO Emeritus of Whitmore Industries. Ring any bells? My mother's face had gone very pale. That can't be the same woman. Same name, same face, same everything. Oh, and she sent me a thank you note today, through her personal caregiver. I held up Eleanor's note, and I watched my family's expressions change from disbelief to shock to something that looked suspiciously like panic. A caregiver came to our house? My mother asked weakly. Maria Santos. Very nice lady. She said Eleanor hasn't stopped talking about how kind I was to her. My father cleared his throat. Madison, are you sure this isn't some kind of mistake? Maybe it's just someone with the same name. I clicked through several more articles showing them photo after photo of Eleanor at charity galas, business conferences, and award ceremonies. In every picture, she was wearing expensive clothes and surrounded by other wealthy, influential people. The articles mention that she's been dealing with early-stage dementia, I continued, which explains why she was confused and lost yesterday. But it doesn't explain why you all treated her so badly. We didn't know, my mother started. You didn't know because you didn't bother to find out, I interrupted. You took one look at her and decided she was beneath your attention. You called her street trash, Mom. Street trash! Jake was frantically Googling on his phone. Oh my God, he muttered. Oh my God, Madison, do you know what this means? It means you were wrong, I said simply. No, it means you just made the connection of a lifetime. Jake's eyes were gleaming with a look I recognized, the same look he got when he talked about potential business deals. Do you realize what kind of networking opportunity this could be? What kind of doors this could open? And there it was, even faced with undeniable proof that they'd misjudged Eleanor completely. My family's first thought wasn't about how they'd treated her or about apologizing for their behavior. It was about what they could gain from the situation. Madison, my mother said, her voice suddenly taking on a syrupy, sweet tone I'd never heard before. Honey, maybe we were a little hasty yesterday. Maybe we should invite Mrs. Whitmore over for dinner. You know, to apologize properly. And maybe I could meet her too, Jake added eagerly. I work in finance, you know. I'm sure we'd have a lot to talk about. I looked at my family, really looked at them, and saw them clearly for maybe the first time in my life. They weren't concerned about Eleanor's well-being or embarrassed by their behavior. They were calculating how to use my connection with her for their own benefit. Actually, I said, standing up from the table, I think I'll handle my relationship with Eleanor myself. My mother's smile faltered. But Madison, we're family. We're family when it's convenient for you, I said. Yesterday, when you thought she was nobody important, you grounded me for helping her. Today, when you find out she's worth billions, suddenly, you want to be involved. I headed toward the stairs, then turned back. For the record, I'm going to have coffee with Eleanor this week. But I won't be mentioning that I have family who called her street trash and vagrant. I think I'll let her maintain her positive impression of me. As I climbed the stairs, I could hear my family's voices rising in agitated discussion behind me. They were probably planning strategies, figuring out how to spin their behavior, trying to find a way to benefit from a situation they'd tried to sabotage. But for the first time in years, I didn't care what they thought. I had Eleanor's note in my hand, and I had the knowledge that my instincts about kindness and human dignity had been right all along. My family had taught me that success meant judging people by their appearance, protecting your reputation above all else, and only associating with people who could benefit you socially or financially. Eleanor had taught me something different in just one afternoon, that true character reveals itself in how you treat people when you think no one important is watching. As I lay in bed that night, I thought about the coffee invitation and smiled. My family might not understand the value of kindness for its own sake, but I was about to learn it from someone who'd built an empire on exactly those principles. Tomorrow, I would call Eleanor, and for the first time in my life, I wouldn't be asking my family's permission to do the right thing.